Happy weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining us with what we are calling the Harambe Talks. And today, Harambe talks to Will Travers, who is a legendary conservationist and has been fighting for pretty much his whole life to stop this captivity and stop this abuse of animals worldwide. And he is the president of the Born Free Foundation. Now, if you're not familiar with the Born Free Foundation, we highly encourage you to go to their website and check it out, because there is a massive, massive issue with animals that are being kept in captivity. And the name Born Free says it all. It's actually the solution to all of the suffering that these animals face. It's one concept that creates the future path. And it's a way that we have to reframe our thinking and talk about it. So we're very excited to have Will on today. He's been very busy and is excited that he could take some time today, meet with us and talk to us about Harambe, because it's such an important story. And the more we see more press coming out, the more we see more people discussing what's happening and the zoos, we're finding that people have a very almost a blind trust in zoos to educate, to keep the animals safe and to keep the guests safe and to do what is considered the best animal welfare. Although we don't always know the cases, we know that the majority of the time that is not the case itself. And today we wanted to talk about one of the really important things in Harambe movie is to discuss zoochosis. Now, zoochosis was a word that comes from the Born Free Foundation. So really quickly, we don't want to waste any more time. We're going to bring Will right on and let's start talking about these topics. Let's start talking about captivity, how zoos can help or not help, and what is the future for animals in captivity. So here we go. Thank you, Will, for being on today with us.
Oh, it's a great pleasure, Eric. How nice to see you again.
Great. Yeah, great to see you again. It's been a little while. We did our first interview for the Harambe movie about 2 years ago.
It was a couple of years ago, and the world has changed, not always for the better, but the world is still as troubled a place as it was then, slightly different challenges, but nonetheless desperately important. And the natural world, which I know we're both fascinated by and committed to, is in real trouble. And it seems like some of the sort of short-term agendas of those that we elect or our leaders seem to be taking precedence over the long-term survival of the natural world and indeed the planet, which includes ourselves. So we really are up against it at the moment. So we need to do all we can.
It's great. Well, it seems like people are really picking it up and keeping it going and keeping these important conversations going. And, your work for the last many, many years has been to make sure that everybody keeps talking about what's happening to animals in captivity. So this is a perfect opportunity to share with everybody that we have on today and discuss that a little bit. First of all, for people that aren't familiar with the Born Free Foundation, if you can just kind of tell us about what you guys do and the organization.
Sure. Well, thank you. So as the name might suggest, those of you with long memories may remember a film called Born Free, books called Born Free by the famous Joy Adamson, and then a film called Born Free that came out in 1966. And that film starred a number of lions, but it also starred my mum and dad, Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, my late father. And it was the beginning of our family's fascination with wildlife. The next big step was working with an elephant in a film called An Elephant Called Slowly, a little wild-caught elephant that had been caught by the Kenya government of the day as a gift to London Zoo. And after filming, after waylaying her for about 6 weeks, she was, despite our best efforts, she was sent to London Zoo, where in 1983 she was euthanized at the age of 17. And she looked like a husk of an elephant. She was, her skin was dry. Her tusks were one was completely gone. One was broken in half. She displayed stereotypic behavior, which we now more broadly describe as zoochosis. And They tried to move her to another zoo and the move failed. Anyway, long story short, she died. And we wondered at that time who was looking at what was going on in zoos, because there is a kind of received wisdom. The zoos have been around for a very long time, even in their modern form. In London Zoo, the 1820s, London Zoo was established in its modern form. And so it's sort of handed down from one generation to the next that zoos are a, quote, good thing. Why would you go on a Saturday afternoon and take your kids to a bad thing? You know, it's counterintuitive. So they must be good. And we questioned that. So we said, is it really all it's cracked up to be? Looking at the claims around conservation, around education, around research, and our continuing research now for 40 years indicates to us very strongly that zoos have broadly failed in their three objectives: to educate, to carry out research, and to conserve. Of course, anyone watching this will go, oh yeah, but I know a zoo where they keep make it up, lions very well, or I know a zoo that puts some money into the conservation of gorillas or something. And yes, there are, but there are something in the order of 10,000 zoos around the world. They spend billions of dollars every year. And this is at a time where we're in a biodiversity crisis, and the natural world is crying out for the scale of investment necessary to turn the tide, to slow the decline, halt the decline, and reverse the decline in biodiversity. And I would argue that zoos play no more than a bit part in that great drama, and that we have to find better ways of supporting nature than to have animals incarcerated in 10,000 institutions around the world using billions of dollars every year just to tick over, when we really need to be investing in nature and the wild and to reverse the decline in biodiversity.
That, you know, and that is something that people don't ever seem to connect: the zoo and the natural world, and the difference between them. You know, we have been hearing a lot of people say, well, you know, they have all these breeding programs and they're saving important species. So let's talk about that for a second. What in your experience? So these breeding programs, first of all, do they help the wild, and what do you find to be their intent and purpose?
Yeah, I mean, there are breeding programs. There are coordinated breeding programs that zoos collaboratively and cooperatively engage in for a very limited number of species. There was a famous zoologist called Ulysses Seal who worked for the IUCN's Reintroduction Specialist Group. And his estimate, not my estimate, was that if you took all the space in all the zoos, all the federated zoos, I should say, not the roadside menageries, but all the zoos that belong to either the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, or the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquaria, or the AZA, or any of these federated organizations, if you took all the space in those zoos and devoted it to cooperative breeding of threatened species, you could probably look after 500 species. Well, there are 33,000 species of plant and animal that are threatened by international trade and are listed on the CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora appendices. So with the best will in the world, and being as generous as I can be, and I try to be generous, I don't think zoos touch the sides of the issues. There will be some entities that stand head and shoulders above others that are doing not just a bit more, but a lot more. But they are in a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. And so if you regard zoos as a big experiment, that's how I like to describe it. If you say there's this big experiment that's been going on for nearly 200 years, which involves keeping species in captivity, breeding them in captivity, potentially returning them to the wild to reinforce wild populations or repopulate areas that have lost that particular species. And through that process, we will invite the public to attend. And there are 600 odd million zoo visits a year. So a lot of people go to zoos. You would have thought that that combined effort would have generated an enormous groundswell of conservationists and activists and people, dedicated to the protection of the natural world and to wild species. And I have to say, I cannot find a correlation between all those people going to zoos and all that money being spent on animals in captivity and the captive breeding program. I can't find a correlation between that effort and the end result that we seek, which is to protect the natural world, which is still in free fall, quite frankly, around the planet.
It's a great point. So many people have been going for so long. The zoos, real quick, the breeding thing, we were noticing with gorillas that they only seem to breed Western lowland gorillas. Whereas if they really were concerned, there are other gorillas whose numbers are way lower than the Western lowland gorillas. And we never hear about them from the zoos. We don't hear about them in our education at the zoos. Well, I should say the education. Because as you mentioned, with over 600 million zoo visits a year, people have not taken up that mantle and said, let's save these. It feels like it's not working. This idea of the ambassadorship is not inspiring people in the way that the zoos portray that they're trying to inspire people. Do you think that the ambassadorship is working, or do you think that it's even needed in order to help save animals?
I don't think that it's a sort of functional model. What I will say is, for example, if I take the Aspinall zoos, there are two zoos in the United Kingdom run by Damien Aspinall in conjunction with the Aspinall Foundation. And you mentioned Western lowland gorillas. I'm not aware of, frankly, anybody breeding Eastern lowland gorilla, which is the one of the three gorilla species, the one that is in most peril because its decline is faster than any of the other two. In fact, the mountain gorilla numbers are, with a huge amount of effort, all in the wild effort, are creeping up. Western lowland gorilla still numbers significant numbers of animals, but the Eastern lowland gorilla, the Gras gorilla, is in massive trouble in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Damien Aspinall has successfully bred gorillas in captivity and has successfully returned more gorillas to the wild than all other zoos put together. And his mission, as I understand it to be, and this is in the published literature, is that he wants to go out of business. He does not think that the zoo model is truly effective. So his whole effort is pivoting towards rewilding animals and then putting his time, his effort, and his money into conserving and protecting species in their natural habitat. To think that, in a zoo, you might have a few elephants, you might have a few tigers, you might have a few lions, you might have a few gorillas, and that somehow the suffering of those individual animals, and no doubt that in 99% of cases, those animals are suffering in captivity. They are deprived of their natural social structures. They're deprived of their natural environment. They live their lives according to the regime that we impose on them. So, for example, an elephant might be let out into the outside yard at, say, 8 in the morning. And if you're in the United Kingdom in winter, it gets dark at 3:30, 4 in the afternoon, the elephant will be back in. That means that elephant is inside an elephant house for 16 hours every single day during the winter. We have inclement weather, we have sub-zero temperatures. And to say that the suffering of that animal, because it's an ambassador for its species, is acceptable, is to me unacceptable. Is completely wrong. And while maybe 50 years ago or more, some people in the zoo world could have made a case to say, yes, but look, how are people, urban people, in our increasingly urbanized society, going to sort of engage with the issues? I mean, if I think back that long, and I'm 64, when I was a child, there were there were 3 terrestrial television channels in the United Kingdom. That was it. Then there was a 4th, and now, of course, with satellite and streaming services and everything else, we have hundreds. It does mean, of course, that the audiences for each show tend to be an awful lot smaller. But we have the internet, we have virtual reality, we have augmented reality, we have so many different platforms and ways to better understand and engage with the natural world in our urban society than we did 50 years ago. The zoo option has dramatically diminished, in my opinion, dramatically diminished in its significance.
That's there has been so much change, and it is amazing to see an international community starting to click and connect. And it seems that people want to see rewilding. They want to see us go back to nature. It feels like, at least you hear a lot of people talking about, I wish I could go back to the day when there weren't cars, where we could just walk to the village, so there's something inside of us that connects with nature, and it has been somewhat chopped off from our instinct, being surrounded by concrete and walls for so long, but it's still inside of us. And that to me is an indication that every animal, even born in zoos, has that and knows that they're supposed to be somewhere else.
That may well be true, and I think that we've also got, Eric, to try and wean ourselves off the idea that the only wildlife that matters is sort of exotic wildlife that lives on the other side of the planet. Of course that matters, and of course we need to put time, effort, and resources into assisting the countries where those species live in protecting those species and protecting those habitats, increasing the size of habitats despite the growth in human populations. All of those real life challenges that conservationists face each and every day. But we must also remember that we have opportunities to engage with wildlife right on our doorstep. Even if you live in a tower block, there's almost certainly a park 5 minutes away. There's some green space 5 minutes away. If you go to a school and there's a little small patch of land there that could have trees, that could have be planted for insects and for pollinators, then we can do something about it really close to home. So it's important that we don't segment nature into the nature we want to save and the nature that we really don't care about and that can be destroyed. We need it all, and we need it all now. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, is there hope? And I said, if you ask me that question in 10 years' time, and we haven't taken the actions necessary to address the climate change crisis, the biodiversity crisis, then in 10 years' time, I'll say there is no hope. Right now, this is our window of opportunity. And to bring it back to our subject, I don't think that zoos are stepping up to the mark to make the substantive difference in the immediate time frame that is absolutely essential as we stand here in 2023.
That's it's a really great point. We hear about we're going to have different collapses in biodiversity, different collapses in the climate, and a lot of people they get upset when they hear that. But to me, it's an amazing thing that we are alive in this time right now, where what we do will affect the entire future. We're here at a very critical moment, and every action we take will determine that particular future. And it's true, I haven't seen any of the zoos make any changes in any way, shape or form. We actually spoke to a primatologist that said that, and it's along the lines of what you were saying. There's no way that they can breed and then get everybody out back into the wild. So the zoo model itself, no matter how they rotate it, is not going to become a solution unless it becomes potentially like a vet care type of thing for local animals. We found when we were like in the UK, we found places that were zoos, but they had only local animals. And I think of people that can tell me about zebras, but they don't know anything about their local squirrels, their local pollinators, their local birds or wildlife, and their own biodiversity. They're completely unaware of.
Well,
So there is an interesting awareness we need to start picking up.
I agree, and I think that there are there are really practical issues here. So I have not been a fan of zoos throughout my entire professional life. I would like to see the humane phasing out of zoos, and I would like to see our time, effort, and resources put into conserving and protecting wildlife in the wild. But there are practical implications to that. What about the animals that are in zoos now that can't go back to the wild? We know what happens to them. So the establishment of sanctuaries, of effectively sort of retirement homes for wild animals that have no future except in captivity, is very important. Born Free is involved in several sanctuaries and rescue centers, one in Ethiopia, which not only looks after the animals, but also effectively assists in the wildlife law enforcement that's carried out by our partners at the Ethiopian Wildlife Conservation Authority. I mean, if you're an officer and you uncover someone who's smuggling cheetah cubs out of the Horn of through Ethiopia, out of the Horn of Africa into the Middle East as status symbol pets, but there's nowhere for you to put them if you step in and intervene and confiscate, you're going to be, think twice before you take action. What do I do with these animals? By having the only wild animal rescue center in Ethiopia, we actually perform a function not just for the animals involved, but for the wildlife law enforcement agencies that are trying to do their job. So we need to think about sanctuaries and the role that they can play and how they are different from zoos. They're not about buying and selling animals. They're not about breeding animals, because you don't want to set up a sanctuary but continue breeding, and then you end up being full in 3 years, and now you can't take any more animals that need rescue. There's all sorts of permutations that we need to consider. But I think one of the things that I've been fascinated by recently has been the frustration that I sense amongst young people. And I was listening to a friend of mine, a British naturalist called Chris Packham, talking the other day about his profound, almost despair. I don't want to put it too strongly, but he said, I have been an observer of the destruction and decline of the very thing that I love and that I've spent my life trying to protect. And he feels, I think it's not too strong to say, I think he feels a failure. And I share that. As I said, I've been doing this for 40 years. And I guess the best that I could claim is that things might have got worse a little more slowly, but not necessarily stopped or got better because of the effort that not just, of course, just not me, but so many people have put in. And I think that that's that tipping point, that I understand why young people, for example, feel desperately frustrated, that they look at their TV or look at their tablet or their smartphone, or they listen to their elected leaders. They're probably too young to vote. And all they see is this devastation that's going on, climate change, extreme weather events, the increase in the inequality between those who have and those who have not, the crisis that's going to face us when it comes to water, to food, to the distribution of food, the encroachment of human societies into marginal land that 30 years ago we'd have said quite clearly, well, no, there's no point in trying to farm on that land because it's going to be in a cycle of drought every 3 years, perhaps now every 2 years, and our crops will fail. But now we're even going into those areas because we have kind of run out of road. And of course, what does that mean for wildlife? It means that the wildlife estate the land on which wildlife lives and must rely on is getting increasingly put under pressure. There is some interesting and I think good news. In Kenya, for example, there is an entity called the Northern Rangelands Trust, and the NRT is a kind of umbrella organization for local communities who want to live with wildlife, who have historically lived with wildlife, who want to benefit not by killing wildlife, but by having wildlife on their land, which does good things for their ecology, but also opens up the opportunity for tourism and revenue generation in those areas. And the NRT now manages collaboratively an area of land bigger than all the national parks and national reserves in Kenya put together. So someone said to me the other day, is the problem that the amount of land available for wildlife is going down? And I said, in general, that probably is true, but there are some good examples of where a different way of thinking is bringing more land back for wildlife, not reducing it.
And I think like you're talking about, it's almost like there's this short-term goal of how do we save the animals right now that are suffering, and then there's the long-term goal of how do we change our perception and our thinking and our relationship to the natural world for a long-term solution as well. And I love that because you guys have really focused on that, I think, with Born Free, not just practical solutions, which you guys are always pushing and promoting and helping animals every day, but also how do we think differently? And again, it goes back to the Born Free idea, because thinking about Harambe, we hear a lot of the, the mother was responsible, the zoo, the thing is that the only way to have prevented that tragedy was if he would have been born free. And it really does come down to that. So I think there is a beautiful seed, just even the name of your foundation puts in people's minds. And I think,
what are the values that we value most? I think, you're right. The only way that the Harambe tragedy could not have happened had there not been a zoo with Harambe. I mean, that would have made 100% sure that tragedy never occurred. Otherwise, it was a combination of misunderstandings and maybe safety issues and all sorts of different factors that came into play that opened up the opportunity for the tragedy to happen that indeed did happen in the end. But I think that if we think about our values and then try to create the society that we want to see based on those values, I believe that the two strongest values of all are love and freedom. And if you think about how we articulate our desire for freedom, we have the Statue of Liberty. We have in France, the motto is liberté, fraternité, égalité, liberté. We think about freedom, the freedom to choose our own path. Of course, society must build some rules around it, but freedom is incredibly important. Freedom to love whom we want to love, freedom to do what we want to do, freedom to go where we want to go. And with that comes enormous responsibility. And I think part of that responsibility is to express our freedoms in a way that does no harm. So I want to nail the idea, and this may not necessarily be something that your listeners agree with, but for me, the freedom to go and kill an animal for fun is not a freedom that I confer. It's not a freedom that we should tolerate. Taking away a life is taking away that animal's freedom, and my choice to go and see that animal has now been eradicated as well. So I think that Freedom comes with huge responsibilities. Love comes with huge responsibilities. But those values should underpin every single thing that we do. And kindness and compassion cannot be measured. They should be unconditional.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I just want to, real quick, we have a couple people joining us. I just want to say hi to. I see that we have Pamela. Hey, Pamela, thank you for joining. Julie is a friend of ours who's actually working to try to get Lucy out of the Edmonton Zoo, and has been working tirelessly to try to bring more attention to that story and to try to help Lucy be moved out of freezing conditions in Canada. Julie has shown us some images and some videos of Lucy in snow, snow conditions, incredibly cruel area, which I also want to get into the zoo concept of selling off this torture art, as some people call it. Mike Waller's joining as well. He's amazing water rights activist. And he says the health of the natural world is what really matters, because we have encapsulated so much of the Earth's surface, and that puts a pinch on our health as humans and the planet itself.
It does. Mike's right. Because of the pandemic, in lockdown, I think people, many people all over the world, realize just how important sort of access to nature is for their mental well-being. And maybe because planes weren't constantly flying overhead, and we weren't caught up in the race to get to work and then the race to get home from work, and missed out on life in the meantime, we appreciated that context with nature. And Julie, I just want to say, keep going, because I remember the story of Maggie. I think it was the elephant in Alaska, the only elephant in Alaska, in a shopping mall. And it took years of campaigning for her to be eventually brought to the Paws Sanctuary in California, which I've been fortunate enough to visit. And what that story tells me is, firstly, you have to be relentless, and you have to, never give up, never give in. At the same time, that thing I said earlier, you have to have somewhere for that animal to go that is a massive improvement on his or her quality of life. And the work that Ed Stewart and Chris Draper and others do at the Paws Sanctuary in California is quite remarkable, and gives those elephants a second chance of a life worth living. And I think that that's vital.
And you guys have had a lot of experience, and the good thing is you've seen a lot of victories. I know that you're always cataloging what's happening in the zoos in captivity worldwide, US, UK, but even beyond, as you were mentioning, Africa and other areas where you guys are working. So you always have your finger on the pulse of how our wildlife is doing and how our world is doing. And I know that must be a bit overwhelming sometimes. Working in the field, you lose a little bit of your soul sometimes when you see these things.
But you're right. The victories are always hard won, but when you get a victory, it gives you the energy and it gives you the gas in the tank to move on to the next victory, however hard that is. So I'll give you just a couple of examples, 3 examples. The first one is that I started working on captive dolphins in the UK in the late 1980s. And by 1992, the end of 92, beginning of 93, there were no more captive dolphins in dolphin area in the UK. We were involved in a team that took 3 of the last dolphins to the Caribbean and ultimately released them successfully into the wild. And there have been no dolphins in captivity in the UK now since 1992. And someone who's got better maths than me will tell me that's over 30 years. And there's no appetite for it either. There's not a screaming horde outside of our Department for Environment saying, why aren't we allowed to have dolphins back in the UK? There just isn't. the second one is something very recent, really, in the United States. The publicity that was generated around Tiger King opened a lot of people's eyes to the sort of showmanship, roadside menagerie, private ownership of big cats in this instance. And the introduction and the signing into law of the Big Cat Public Safety Act by President Biden, only, 9 months ago, is a massive step forward, in my view. We actually helped draft the original text for that in 2008 or something like that. So again, took a long time to get it over the line, but that gives you energy. And now, of course, we're focusing in the States on things like the Primate Safety Act, which would prohibit the private ownership of primates, which can have catastrophic outcomes, both for the animals, but also for people as well. And then my final example is, I think it was 1994, I started working on a government committee in the United Kingdom, which lasted for 3 years, looking at wild animals in circuses. And then they reconvened the committee in 2005-06, and we'd worked for another 2 years, and it did not gain the political traction necessary. But just a few years ago, the government passed into law a ban on the use of wild animals in circuses in the United Kingdom, and now we have none. And hooray! It wasn't a lot of animals that were involved, but the principle behind it and the signal that it sends to other countries and other campaigning organizations and to individuals who really want to make a change is, as I said before, don't give up, don't give in, because I think we are on the right side of history when it comes to these kind of issues, and the tide is flowing in one particular direction, and we have younger generations coming along who are eager and urgently want these changes to take place. What we have to do is to help create the circumstances, the environment in which those changes can happen, and then shift our emphasis, effort, energy to stabilizing our fragile planet and our fragile natural world for future generations. I have kids. I do talk to them about these things, and they're very supportive. But I can imagine how many people are so disillusioned with what they see when they open the paper or watch something on their screen, however big or small.
That's exactly it. We need to. The next generation does seem very passionate. It's fantastic. I was actually just on an elephant rescue recently, and with us was one of the people working on it had brought their 12-year-old daughter, who had been to Taiji and has also worked in several animal rescue things. And so she's kind of growing up with that as a normalcy. When I grew up in America, anything eco-based was not normal at all. We had Earth Day, and that was one day. But, and anybody that talked about the environment was kind of really pushed to the side. Yeah. And it feels like the tide has definitely changed, and things are headed in the right direction that way.
And I think you're right. I mean, I'm huge. You've got a few messages there. I just wanted to say, Eric, that my dear mum, who helped found the organization 40 years ago, is still going strong, and she's 92. And the youngest member of our board is 20. Bella Lack, an environmentalist, a campaigner, spoken at the climate summits, and is a outspoken voice for change. So but what I'm really saying is bring young people into the process. Don't regard them as an external voice that sort of just prods your conscience once in a while. Bring them in, make the decisions that we are taking today partly their decisions, because they will then own the journey forwards. I see something from Camilla Millie.
There's Camilla. Let's see. Camilla says, we have to stop thinking of animals as ours to use, whether it's entertainment, pushing animals beyond their limits in sport, clothing, medicine, food, and every other way. All zoos now are making money-making sources. We need to let all animals live their lives for themselves. Humans take and take until there's literally nothing left. When will we learn? It's a very good question, Camilla. I think she makes a great point in that, the animals should have their animal lives. Like Ian Redmond had said, the gorillas are gorilla beings. We're human beings. We have separate paths. They're not interested in running down to the mall and grabbing some shoes. And we have to allow their what they want to do. Eat some leaves or do their thing. It's amazing to me, like, we see a lot of times people will just leave nature alone. And when we do, nature heals itself and starts to bring itself back little by little. I know, we see a lot of hope stories from when COVID happened and people stopped being, so much in nature, and there weren't quite as many cars on the road. And there was a lot of things where our civilization imprint or footprint was a little lessened by that. But also COVID, I know you guys made a great video, and I encourage everybody to go to the website and watch it, about understanding being caged up, because COVID made us all go stir crazy and a little bit cabin fever, because we wanted to get out of there. And for people to take that one step further and imagine that you're born that way and you'll never get to leave the room that you're in. That is what the majority of the animals in captivity face day to day.
Yeah, it's very true. Some really great points being made in the comments. So thank you to everyone who's making comments, Julie and Camilla and Mike and others. I think that there is a misconception. I mean, I'm not an I don't have a degree. I never went to university. So I'm more like a naturalist than an academic. But I was reminded recently that many people have a misinterpretation of evolution. They think evolution is shaped like a pyramid, and that there are lots of less evolved creatures at the bottom, and right at the top, it's us. And I don't really see it like that. I think it's like a flat tree. All species living on the planet right now are as evolved as they can be. We are all equally evolved. That doesn't mean we have the same capabilities, the same capacities, but we are equally evolved. And as the species that has the most ability to influence and change the lives of other species, we should always ask ourselves the question, just because we can, should we? We can do anything. I mean, we can literally obliterate not just the natural world, we can obliterate ourselves. We have enough weapons to wipe out humanity in 24 hours, if that's the craziness that we want to subscribe to. But we also have extraordinary capacity to do good things. There was a wonderful quote from Audrey Hepburn, who I was very fortunate enough to meet once for tea. And I couldn't believe it. I went into a room and there was a cup of tea and 5 people, and she was one of them. And she's quoted as saying, and I believe it's true, and if it isn't true, I want it to be true, that she discovered why you have 2 hands. One hand is to help yourself, and the other hand is to help others. And I think that is a mental attitude. It's a state of mind that we should embrace, because that is the only way we are all going to get through this. I don't mean, me forever. I'll be gone in 20 years' time, probably. But if we are all going to get through this for the long term, then we need to help each other and help ourselves. And at the moment, there's a little bit too much just helping ourselves, as a point that was made in the chat.
That's a really beautiful analogy, and I mean, I guess right now, exactly, it's more like people are more like the crabs that have the little arm and then the giant arm.
I know.
We need to have the same same use with both. That's a really beautiful way to see it. I've never heard it said that way. So
And I'll use one more analogy, Eric, and this is one you've heard, I'm sure, and many others have, but I use it a lot because I think it is. People often say it's just little me, it's just little Will, and what can I do? How can I make any difference whatsoever? And I retell the story of the two. I think they were Chinese gentlemen walking down a beach, and the beach is scattered with starfish. And one of them reaches down and picks up a starfish from the sand and tosses it back into the water, and then reaches down and picks up another. And his friend turns to him and he says, my friend, the beach is littered with starfish. What difference does it make? And the first man reaches down and picks up another starfish and tosses it back in the water and says, it made a difference for that one. And then another, and then another. So I think we can individually make a difference. We can collaboratively make a difference. But the one thing that's common to both of those is the need to make a difference. And that's what your show is about as well.
Beautiful. Yes. And that is another, that's exactly what people need to keep in mind. It'd be nice if those started to come in more of the way that we brought children up, as opposed to them singing a song like Three Blind Mice, where they're about to be killed or whatever. It would be nice to start to bring that kindness in. I'd heard a really great. I was talking to Peter Egan about this, and he was talking about how a lot of the children's nursery rhymes and the things like that are designed to create this selective compassion. And it feels to me that once that selective compassion grows and grows and grows inside of people, we always end up with that incorrect nature pyramid, like you were talking about, where people mistake themselves as the top of it, as opposed to just a part of something.
If it was this shape,
bigger.
If it was this shape, then I would say that that's not about an evolutionary pyramid. I would say that's a responsibility pyramid. The species at the top has responsibility for all the species below that position in the pyramid. So it's not about being more evolved. It's about having greater responsibility. And we sure do. We certainly do. I was going to say that the issue of, zoos, Harambe, what happened, the tragedy and everything else is sort of looks at the status quo. It's like, we have zoos, we have 10,000 zoos, we have millions of animals, we spend billions of dollars, and will that ever change? And I'm going to be hosting on the 29th of November. I'll say it slowly just in case people are scribbling it down. It's an in-person event, but it is also a streamed event at the Royal Geographical Society in London on the 29th of November. I'll be hosting an event called Beyond Zoos. And I think it's going to be fascinating. I have some really great panelists to talk it through, not to argue. This is not an argument. I will literally ask people to leave if they want to turn it into an argument, because I'm exploring with people what beyond zoos might look like. As we said at the start of this podcast, if zoos have set themselves up to have three main functions, with the fourth one being to entertain people, but the three main functions are to conserve species, to educate people, and to carry out research to support the conservation of species. Can we do it better? What is there beyond zoos that allows us to think differently and act differently, to make a real difference and not be trapped in the captive construct that zoos represent? They are a captive construct as much as they are a captive reality. So let's break those barriers and think differently. And you can find details about that on our website. And I think it's very cheap. And I was going to say it's free. It's not free, but it's like $12 or something. We want people.
That is great. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm so excited because that's one of the biggest problems, is we're not having enough conversations. The opposing sides sometimes dig in, and we need somebody to come in and say, let's discuss this. Let's talk, because only through conversations are we going to find solutions, to be able to ask the right questions, to think about solutions for the future. So it's really exciting that you guys are doing that. I'll definitely be there. Let's see, we've got the link right here in the comments for everybody. Sierra,
There you
just
go.
put that
Well
up for
done,
us.
Sarah.
Producer.
Thank you so much for doing that. We held a similar event last year, Eric, called Beyond Trophy Hunting, and I promise you, in 2 hours, we only mentioned the words trophy hunting twice, because we weren't there to go, well, trophy hunters say this, and those opposed to trophy hunting say that. That was not the purpose of the event. It was to say, what's beyond that? What could we do that's different? What could we do that's better, more compassionate, more inclusive, delivers for local communities, delivers for conservation, but not at the point of a gun? And I want to try and have, and it'll be a challenge, but I'd love to have a similarly adventurous exploration of beyond zoos, because I think it's such a fascinating subject, and we're all a bit, and the difference between the beyond trophy hunting and beyond zoos is that very, very few people have actually participated in trophy hunting, but millions of people in every country have been to the zoo. So you have a real life experience that you can relate to, and maybe you enjoyed it, but maybe you had concerns, and maybe you would ask that question: is there something better we can do? What's beyond zoos?
Love the concept too, beyond zoos. And that actually brings me back to Harambe. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, I think it's a fantastic thing, because it's a very polarizing story. Some people, really see it from different perspectives. With that sort of clashing of ideas, I feel like it's a fertile ground for new concepts to arise. How do you see, what can we do, or how do you see that we can use Harambe's name and concept of everybody pulling together for the benefit of all, as Harambe, and for everybody that doesn't know, that's what Harambe's name literally means: pulling together, sharing, caring, being together. How do you think we can take this event, or what can we take from it that can help us all move forward or learn?
Gosh, that's a massive question. Over the course of my lifetime, there have been certain animals that have symbolized something. So Elsa, the lioness from the Born Free story, and the tragedy of Flipper. Not that Flipper was, in a sense, one individual animal, but Rico Barry's story about the real story of Flipper and the tragedy that lay behind that. And then we have the tragedy of Harambe as well. I think the mistake we make is that we often try and apportion blame, or try and find the villain of the piece. Some people have said it was the zoo. Some people have said it was the, safety consultant. Some people have said it was the parents. I understand why they might think that, but I think that that's thinking too small. I think the villain of the piece, if there is one, is the concept that it is okay to lock up all these animals in alien environments, totally removed from the kind of ecosystem that they would normally have lived in, and for which they are designed. I mean, evolution is a design function for an animal to make the best of the environment in which it has evolved to live. There is no such thing in a zoo. There is no evolved environment. There is a human-made environment that is as artificial as you can get. And then what we do is we try and mitigate the impact of that environment on the animals by introducing environmental enrichment. I mean, if you have to have environmental enrichment, what does that tell you about the environment in the first place? That it is deprived, that it is non-functional, that it is designed around the management needs of human beings, as opposed to the behavioral, social, psychological, and physical needs of the animals. So I think the concept is so deeply flawed, And this 200-year experiment that I've mentioned needs to come to an end. And we don't have a great deal of time to do this. Because if we're going to pivot and put the energy and money and resources and human resources and our intelligence and our intellect as the responsible person, the responsible species at the top of that pyramid that we've discussed earlier, then we have the next decade to do this. If we don't crack it, in my view, if we don't crack it in the next decade, reversing that process, going back up the hill, getting back to where we actually know we should be is going to be so hard. It will be almost impossible. So now is that moment, and we should seize it as a moment of opportunity. We shouldn't be like staring at like a rabbit in the headlights of the car that's coming towards it down the road. We should be seeing this as an extraordinary opportunity, a once, not in a lifetime, but almost a once in a species opportunity. We have spent the last 300 years, 400 years, forgive me, but screwing up the planet. Now we have a chance, because we've reached a moment of realization, of self-awareness, that allows us to go, that was then. We can't undo history. What we can do is make a better future.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I love, we have to keep looking forward. And that's one of the most important things. And, it is important for people to understand that they are empowered. And, I hope everybody today, if you haven't heard that starfish story, think about that and think about how each of us can do that, because, Will, thank you for not only pursuing, freedom for animals, but bringing these conversations out, bringing these conversations beyond zoos, beyond trophy hunting. We don't know the answers. It's like the Harambe movie. People say to me, well, what's the answer? And I say, I don't know, but I know that we have to, it's not out there yet. We have to still conceive of it, and then we can create it. So we're in that step right now. And, you're doing an amazing work by making sure those conversations happen and asking people and allowing people, giving people that space to think in a different realm. And it's not always available in society. And so the work you're doing is super important.
Eric, you're very kind. And thank you so much for inviting me onto this podcast. I've enjoyed it. And I'm always inspired and stimulated by these kind of conversations. If, as you say, if people kind of like what they've heard, frankly, if they don't like what they've heard, but they're interested in what they've heard, check out Born Free's website, check out Born Free USA's website. Come along, sign up for the Beyond Zoos event at the end of November. I think it's around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the UK for a couple of hours. So for listeners and viewers in the States, it'll fit into US time zones very well. I hope you'll be there. I know you will.
Great. Oh, yeah. I cannot wait to see this. This is going to be great. Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Will. We really appreciate taking the time, and amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye now.
All right, everybody. Well, there you got the time to spend talking to Will. I was very lucky to be able to interview him and Virginia. They are both in the movie. I'm going to play a small clip for everybody to check out from the movie. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a little bit of a sneak peek. But, I think what Will said was so important. We have to think beyond. And we have to create that path out of love and kindness. Those are our tools for the future, a better future for everybody. So it was very beautifully said, and I really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you, Mike, for being here. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Camilla. Thank you, Sierra, for being here. Thank you, Sierra, for helping produce the movie. You guys haven't quite met her yet, but I'm talking her into getting onto a podcast with us. So, but thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's been an amazing conversation. These are the conversations we need in order to really see the future change. So we look forward to talking to everybody again soon, and we hope to see everybody joining us tomorrow for the worldwide premiere online. If you're not sure about tickets, just come onto my profile or go to the Harambe movie. And we still have tickets available for the online event. The in-person event, I believe, is sold out, so we don't have that option. But hit us up and let us know. And if you're in Cincinnati, we'll try to get you there anyway. So thank you, everybody.